could serve on this working group that you trust, so that when we come to town meeting, you can say, oh yeah, Joe Smith was part of that group.
Because of the acoustics, but what that means is that we can't have a lot of side talking so everyone can hear the presenter. So I'm asking everyone's cooperation for that. Does that make sense? Again, this mic is not doing anything, Mrs. Wright. It's for the video camera so we can live stream this. This is for the people at home. Yeah, so we're going to, all the presenters will be speaking up. If you want to even come up here, you might be able to hear a little bit better. Okay. So I'm going to introduce Selectman Brett.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. And this event is being hosted by the Economic Development Committee. The Board of Selectmen and I, as a member, put together this committee to look at opportunities around Upton to generate some economic activity, to build some development revenue for the town, to offset some of the residential tax rate. Right now, we've got a 5% resident or 5% business tax out of 100%. So 95% of our taxes fall onto the shoulders of residents that live in private homes. And so the Economic Development Committee's goal and objective is to try to find ways to bring business into the community and revitalize certain parts of the town where they can, but also to bring business and revenue to the town, again, to offset that tax rate. So we, again, appreciate everybody's time, everybody coming out tonight. This is a great showing, and we're going to have a great opportunity to hear what you have to say. So please be candid, be forthright, and this is the beginning of a very transparent, open, and public process, so that when we go to town meeting, we can all sit there and declare that we've been part of the process, we've been engaged, the town asked for our opinions and asked for our perspectives, and we can come up with the best solution possible for the people of the town of Upton. So thank you again, and I'll hand it over to Bill McCormick.
All right, thank you, Brett. Thank you all for coming. What I want to do is just kind of frame up a little bit about why we're here. The whole process and everything is going to be managed by someone else. But what I want to do is get people to a place where we understand what the Economic Development Committee is trying to lead, okay? Again, our charter from the Selectmen was three things. Help revitalize downtown. Part of that might incorporate some more zoning. We'll talk about that a little bit later, and additional uses to properties. And then thirdly, develop an economic development plan for the town of Upton. So those are the three things that our committee is supposed to do. So our first call to action on task number one, which is the work to revitalize downtown. What I want to point out is the problem, as we see the problem statement really is that we've got failing or underperforming properties across the street from the town hall. So some of those properties, and we'll get into that a little bit more later on some of the maps, is the former Holy Angels Church. It's in disrepair, no defined purpose for this property, and it was about 13 years ago that the church started planning to move away from that property. So here we are 13 years later. The town acquired it last year. We need to determine a use or a future for that property. So there's also another town-owned parcel where the former Bottano's restaurant was. That's now a parking lot. So there's two town parcels involved, and two privately owned parcels that we're going to talk about a little bit more later. The reason that we see this as a problem is the combined look and real estate taxes that we collect from those buildings is pretty minimal. So we believe some other use, and that's what we're going to ask all of you for help, some other use is going to better perform with respect to tax revenue for the town. So we know that the opportunity is here now because we own the church. We acquired it last year. We have leadership in the town willing to work on this. The selectmen created this committee. We committee people are passionate about trying to move this thing forward. So we see this as an opportunity that we need to move on now, okay? As a backdrop, I think interest rates being affordable and the economy being somewhat stable, we think is a good time to talk about a project like this. We think this revitalized property will look better, will bring more services to town, a few of this and a few of that. We don't know yet. We shall see what comes. And that's really the first leg of the work that the Economic Development Committee is doing, is focusing in this downtown area. So with that, we're going to go to Steve Rakitin, our co-chair, who is going to take you through a presentation that we've done to many groups in town already.
Okay. This committee was formed last August, and again, there are 5 people on the committee. The chairman is not. The chairman is sick. Okay, that's why I'm here. Our mission is to promote business in town to help lower everyone's taxes. That's what our mission is. We envision a downtown that has the following characteristics. First, it's vibrant. There's a reason to come here. Second, it's diverse. There may be housing, apartments, there may be an assisted living center, a library, who knows what might be in the downtown. It's diverse. We want to encourage small businesses to start in Upton and stay in Upton. If you've been in town for a while, you may remember across the street there was a business called Upton Tea Imports. That business was started by an Upton person in his basement, and he's grown that business from a little store across the street into a huge tea importing business, and he's now located in Holliston. Well, we should have been able to keep him here, and that's the point. We want to encourage small businesses to start here and stay here. The other characteristic we want for downtown is that it should be walkable. If you have crossed the street in front of Town Hall lately, especially during the day, you know what a challenge that can be. So we have to we can improve traffic, how we can make the downtown safer for people. Also would like to connect several of the historic aspects of our town to the whole downtown, Upton downtown. So what we're here to do is eventually, not tonight, but eventually, is reach some consensus as a community. What we want our downtown to be like. And Peter, the consultant we've hired, is to help us out how to do that. Very early, the committee recognized that we do not have the expertise to figure out how to reach consensus. And that's why we engage the services of a consultant who's done this many, many times for many communities like ours. So after I'm done, he's going to walk us through the process. Once we achieve a shared vision, once we reach consensus, then the next is to bring consensus to the May town meeting, where it will be discussed, debated, and eventually voted on. If it's approved, move forward with some part of it. Renovating and reinvigorating a downtown is a multi-year activity. It certainly isn't going to happen overnight. What we do, we may also be able to get some funding from the state to help. So the overview. The committee spent time in January meeting with every board and committee that exists in town. Everyone that would have to meet with them, help explain what we're doing and get people in. So, like I said, have engaged the services of a professional facilitator to help us. We're going to process and explain what we're going to do tonight. And again, the end goal of this is to reach consensus. Once we reach consensus, we are then, like I said, going to present that at town meeting where it'll be discussed or voted on and eventually, hopefully, implemented. Whatever we decide to implement, we'll go through the usual process. We'll have to publish RFPs. We may have to do some zoning necessary based on what the consensus is. If we do start construction, the town will be responsible for issuing permits and for managing that. The idea here is, several years ago, an architect who lives in town came up with a picture like this. And he was to come up with this picture because at that time, the town hall hadn't been renovated yet. And the selectmen at the time wanted to imagine town center might look like with the town hall, renovated town hall as the anchor. And this is one idea. So over the next 2 or 3 months, we're going to be creating many pictures like this. And hopefully by the time we get to May, if it's possible, we'll have a picture that we all agree on. How likely is that? I have no idea. But that's the goal. That's what we're trying to do. So I'd like to introduce Peter Flinker. He is principal at Dotson and Flinker Associates, and he's going to explain the process.
Thanks. You're going to hold on to this? Okay. Yeah, so I'm Peter Flinker. I'm a landscape planner in Mass many years ago, and have been doing this kind of thing ever since. And this is incredible. We expected 50, maybe 60 people. We have over 100. So you'll have to bear with us. The sound obviously is going to be difficult. We hope to break into small groups in a little while and have you talk to members of the committee and talk to us about what you think is important about this place, is working, what's not working. But all of that is going to take a great deal of patience on your part. Oh, this one's not working. All right, so my lapel mic is not working. As you heard, we're using the mics for the TV broadcast, but they don't actually help with this process. So anyway, I congratulate you on being so excited enough to come out on a cold, rainy winter night. That's great, and I hope we can continue this energy. But I beg your forbearance as we move forward to this process tonight, because there's so many people here. It's great. So we need to put up our show. Excuse me. Upton, come back. All right, here we are in the center of Upton. Let's see if we can get that in focus. Reasonably good. This is our study area, which means to say it's generally focused on the center of Upton Center, but it includes some larger area around it. Because one of the things we've learned is that you can't really figure out what the right solution is for 1 or 2 buildings or a couple of parking lots or one intersection in the center of a place unless you think about how that place is connected to all the places around it. So one of the first questions we're going to ask you later tonight is, how do you get to this place? How do you know you've arrived? And how is it connected to the other places? So generally, it's the center area. We're also going to be looking in more focused area just around the core and thinking about how, what buildings do we want to keep? What buildings can we do with those buildings? But this is the process we have going forward, and I beg your indulgence. But basically, after tonight, we're going to be forming a working group, and this will consist of 30 or 40 people, including many of you, if you're interested in participating, and we're going to have a series of 4 meetings. Those are marked in green up there. So basically, our goal is in May for the town meeting at May 2nd, is to have a consensus about where we want to go with the town center. We won't be talking about changing zoning or implementing, choosing a particular course of implementation, but we just want to get a sense of what do we want this place to be, what do we want it to be in the future, how do we want it to work, what kind of uses do we want, etc. So that's our goal for May. But we're going to go through this process because one of the things we've learned is that if you just jump into drawing pictures, you often lose sight of a lot of things that are really important, like the economic activities, the market potential, who's using this place, who lives here, who works here. And so we're going to go through this process and look at each of those elements pretty carefully so that we get to the end. We know that it's based on good information. So the first working group meeting, which will happen probably in a few weeks, early in February, will be focused on what we call a shared fact-finding process. I don't know if you've noticed, but facts have gotten kind of political over the last couple of years. And if we can't agree as to what the basic facts are, we're never going to come up with a plan that we can agree on. So the first step is to think about what facts are important to understand the future of this place and to plan for the future of this place, and how do we know which facts we can trust, and where do we get the information we need. So just like how many cars are using Main Street? What is it, like 9,000? 9,000 cars per day. We have a slide a little bit later. But if we can't agree on that fact, we can't really talk about whether there's a traffic problem, etc. So each of these facts we're going to go through at that first meeting and get your help into understanding whether or not we can trust that fact, if not, what we need to move forward. So we're going to have a walking tour of Upton Center. We're going to look at the information starting tonight and continuing at that first meeting about the site and its context. And we're going to talk about the issues and the problems and the opportunities moving forward. So that's the first meeting. That'll be basically February. In early March, we'll be having a second working group meeting that will build on the first meeting, but focus more on what we call vision and values, right? So there's 9,000 cars per day using Main Street. What does that mean to us? Is that a good thing, and that there's a lot of customers, or is it too much traffic? So you see, we sort of start with the basic facts, and then we think about what are those, how do they connect to and impinge on the center, and what do we do about it? So the second meeting we'll be talking about understanding the site in the context, verifying the key problems and opportunities, and prioritizing those. Because again, if you don't ask the right question, you're never going to come up with the right answer. So if everybody thinks the question is, we have to deal with traffic on Main Street, then we'll focus on that later on. If everybody thinks the question is, we need to have more businesses on Main Street, we'll focus on that. So you see what I mean? We sort of start with the facts, then we start thinking about what do those facts mean, and then after we finish the March meeting, later in March, we're going to have another public visioning workshop, which will be open to everyone, like this meeting tonight. It might be in the same space, I imagine, but we'll be taking what we learned at the group meetings, coming up with some more workshop exercises, trying to have another very interesting, exciting, interactive experience where people who haven't been involved can learn what the working group has learned and then help us figure out, well, what should our vision be for the future? So that's February, one working group meeting. March, we'll have a second meeting, and then that public visioning workshop. And then in April, we'll come back and we'll start exploring alternatives. Because what's going to emerge from that public workshop is probably a lot of different ideas. Let's tear all the buildings down and start over. Let's preserve every building and not tear anything down. I don't know. So there's going to be a whole range of ideas that come out of it. And so at that third working group meeting in April, we want to explore the different alternatives and see if we can come up with one that sort of merges the best ideas together, or maybe we come up with a completely different plan. And then end of April, before town meeting, the working group will meet again and deliberate on all these different alternatives and make some decisions about what they think the vision is for this place. So this is all kind of the basic planning process, and sometimes you do this all in one workshop. You've probably done that in different workshops here. What we found, though, if you're talking about a place that involves many hundreds and perhaps thousands of people with different opinions, you can't rush it. So that's why we're setting up these different meetings. So again, what we'll be asking you for at the end of this meeting is whether or not you'd like to participate in that working group process over the next couple of months. What you would be committing to is coming to those 4 meetings and probably the public visioning workshop. And what we'll be committing to is not wasting your time when you come to those meetings. Each of them will be well organized and have a clear agenda and a clear set of goals and outcomes, right? So we'll move the process forward. We don't need everybody, and in fact, we can't have everybody. We can't have 120 people at a working group meeting and have any kind of an effective conversation. So what we're looking for, and you can help us do this, what we're looking for is the best representatives of all the different groups and interests that are involved in Upton Center. For instance, business owners, obviously very important, young families who live here, retirees who live here, people, VFW people, town workers, etc. Each of these interest groups is likely to look at Upton Center in a different way, right? And that's partly the discussion we're going to have later tonight. But what we're interested in, and again, what I hope you can help us do, is to identify members of each of those interest groups who could serve on this working group that you trust, so that when we come to town meeting, you can say, oh yeah, Joe Smith was part of that group and he was representing the interests of handsome people to sit in the front row. And therefore, I trust this process. So again, I know nobody needs more meetings to go to. So what I ask you for, if you're not interested in serving on the working group, help us make sure that the right people are at that group. What we're trying to avoid is something that's happened to me too many times, where you come to a town meeting with a great plan, but the wrong people weren't involved in making that plan, and it gets shot down. I think you all understand, I think that's why you're here, that this is a wonderful place, and it's got some great possibilities. But if that planning process is seen as just, a few people getting together in some mysterious room and coming up with the ideas, even if it's a great plan, it's not going to go anywhere. So that's our goal with this process. Any questions about that before we move forward? We're doing pretty well on time? Yes. 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 So what's your question? Right. Thank you. This is exactly the stuff we want to talk about in the small groups. Are there any questions about this process? He said we need to pay attention to traffic safety and the issue of pedestrians risking their lives as they cross these busy roads with the 9,000 and 12,000 cars per day. So what we're going to be doing is focusing on that as some of our questions in the small groups and our other meetings as we go forward. Are there any questions about the process while we're doing this?
Sure, I will. So my question is, how will we as a community, first of all, we're not the first community to go through this. Lots of other towns and communities have gone through this process. Some have succeeded, some have not. How can we as a community learn from the experiences of others about the things that have worked successfully and not, and then overlay our vision, values, and goals to some prior experience that I'm sure that you have to bring to the table? And where does that fit in?
Right, so the question is, how can you learn from other communities, since obviously Upton is one of 351 communities in Massachusetts, and a lot of them have gone through the same issues, and some have come up with good solutions. What we're going to be doing as we go through this working group process, especially later in March and April, is bringing case studies of other towns and bringing those to the working group and saying, you have identified this as a key issue. Here's how 3 other towns have dealt with that issue. And then that'll help the working group to deliberate on how do we make a better sidewalk. There's lots of examples of each kind of these things. Yes? So this coming spring and summer. All right. Right, it's pointed out that there's another project which will be underway in the spring and summer to look at the starting construction, so it's already been. So this is very good information because what we'll want to do is take that information and bring it to the next working group meeting. Was there one more question? Me? All right. I'll repeat the question. I'm sorry about that. Again, this is not the easiest situation, so we'll try to make the best of it. The question is, what other towns have we worked with, and what have we done? Just quickly, we're working currently with Town of Grafton on their. They just did a plan for the transit village, what they're calling a transit village around the train station into Boston, and it basically was looking at how do you take something that can only be reached by a car and connect it with bike trails and sidewalks to the Tufts campus, to other neighborhoods around that, and how do you use what we call infill development to build more stuff around the train station so it become a real neighborhood, that community, and not so looking at a piece of an area along Worcester Street, out by the Millbury exit, which is really the gateway to Grafton, and thinking about how can we change the zoning to make that more of a village center rather than just a commercial strip. So we don't have time to do a lot of examples, but that's the kind of thing that towns are doing around here. All right, I want to move quickly. How much time do we have? 20? We're doing okay? We want to talk a little bit. I'm going to be going back and forth with Dylan, my associate, to present some information that we've already uncovered about the town center. Not that this is a comprehensive look at all the information like town center history, but it sort of introduces the categories that we'll be looking at in more detail as we go forward the next few months. One of these is history.
Hello. Hi, I'm Dylan Sussman. I work with Peter at Dodson and Flinker. So like he said, we've taken a preliminary look at your town from far away and are here to tell you what we see. And then when you break out into small groups, you can talk about whether this is accurate, whether the picture is correct, whether it reflects your experience. So this is Upton Town Center in 1882. In some ways, it looks very similar to the town now. In some ways, it looks different. So right there is Southwick Tavern. That building was demolished shortly after this picture was taken, and you're on that site right now. It was replaced by the town hall. The other thing I notice here is that in 1882, there were very few trees in Upton, right? So that tells you something. If you plant trees, eventually they grow, and they are a defining characteristic of a place. Here it is in 1888, drawn by an artist who may have taken some liberties to make the place look better or worse, depending on their mood. So here you can see the center of Upton. What I see in this picture is that these buildings around the center are creating a space, right? The town center is still there. Back then it was an oval shape. Now it's more of a kind of a triangle with curved sides. And that there was this big open space in front of what's now the town hall and the library and the former Catholic church there. This big open undifferentiated space that's now traffic lanes. Here it is in 1908. You can see again that undifferentiated space. It wasn't paved yet. The electricity had just come to the town. In 1919, this is the Catholic Church, or former Catholic Church with a different color scheme. And then this building, I'm not sure if this building is still there or if it's been demolished and replaced. Yeah, so it went from 3 stories down to 1 story, and then the building next to it was demolished and replaced. And then here we are today. So you can see some of those same elements. You still have this town common. You have the space in between. You've lost some of the buildings that have given the town center some of its definition. They've been replaced by other buildings. But the basic form is still the same.
So what we wanted to do is talk quickly about past plans for the town and how those might relate to the center. The 2005 Upton Master Plan talked about the town center as a place which should be improved and enhanced through a combination of mixed-use, village-scale zoning, and a town center improvement plan. Well, we're working on the plan, and then maybe the zoning will come. Transportation improvements should be sensitive to the unique pedestrian scale of the center, and future development should be of a traditional form where mixed use and a diversity of housing types prevail. All of this seems to make a lot of sense still to us looking at it from the outside. We're going to try to come up with a symbol of values or a goal statement for this process, which may update this for 2019. Some of the elements that they suggested for a town center improvement plan that we want to be aware of is we need to talk about shared parking places. We need to ensure that the design of state roads and the intersection aligns with the town's goals, not just the state's goals or traffic goals. We need uniform styles of signage, materials. We need to improve pedestrian paths and crosswalks, create a child-friendly area, install amenities, benches, street trees, and so on, and link the town center to any existing or planned pedestrian networks. Again, this is all kind of generic town center improvement ideas. I think a key part of this process is to think about what are our priorities for these, because obviously some of these you might have done over the last 13, 14 years. A lot of them you haven't, and the reason is they all cost a lot of money. So the question is going forward, if we agree with this list, what do we want to do first, and how do we make it happen? In 2007, I actually worked on the open space project for the town, and we talked about protecting the historic district from Elm Street to West Upton, to think about expanding a historic district, to inventory the different historic sites, to look for grants for streetscape improvement, appropriate improvements to this corridor, and to adjust zoning to promote restoration and adaptive reuse, to celebrate the district with tours and so on. And some of this has been done, continuing process of the Historical Society to celebrate and preserve the center. Again, we want to think about what should our priorities be going forward, and how does potential redevelopment of the center affect the historic resources that are there? Because obviously you're already looking at a lot of buildings which you'd love to save, but which are going to cost a lot to renovate. And is it worth renovating them to protect that historic value, or do you move on? And then the housing production plan from 2012 identified the town center as a preferred location for new affordable housing, recommended allowing multifamily home by right in the town center, and promoting mixed-use development, which presumably would include a mix of residential uses. This, again, is something that most towns in the Commonwealth are thinking about doing in their downtowns, because it makes sense to have apartments and small homes in a place that has services. But it also introduces a certain amount of stress and strain to have new people living in the center. So again, this is something which we're not going to take and just move forward with, but which we want to talk about and see if there's a consensus about whether and to what extent we want to include new housing in the center. And should some of that be designated affordable housing, or should it be market rate housing, et cetera? So next is sort of thinking about, well, who's that housing for? Who are these different uses for? And that involves the sort of demographics of the town.
Yeah, so this is Upton's population over the past 70, 90 years, since 1930. So in 1930, there were about 2,000 people in Upton. Now there are about close to 8,000 people, according to the U.S. Census. So over that time, your population has about tripled. And you can see, looking at that line, that there was sort of a, there was sort of a ramp up of population growth, with it accelerating up into about 2010. And then since about 2010, it seems like the population growth in Upton has kind of declined in speed. So you're still growing, but you're not growing as quickly as you were in the early part of this millennia. If you look at that same population change just as percentage growth, you can see that Upton, which, excuse me, I'm going to put down a piece of paper. You can see that Upton, which is the gray line on the top, was growing percentage terms faster than the state, which is the blue line in the middle, or Worcester County, which is the orange line in the middle. So you grew faster than the state and the county up until about 2010, and since then you're growing at about a rate that equals the state and the county. So this has implications potentially for town center development, right? Because if something is going to change, there has to be a market for that something, and ultimately the market comes from people. So is there a market for new businesses in the town center based on the population of Upton now, or Upton plus surrounding regions? Is there a market for more housing based on the population of Upton now or expected growth? Another change over time, communities change in terms of the distribution of ages in that town. So out west where I live in western Massachusetts, many of the towns have a very old population. There are few people in their mid-30s and their 40s. There are a lot of people in their 70s, 80s, 90s. Here in Upton, the blue bars there show your population distribution now. In 10, according to the 2010 census, and then as it's projected to be in 2030. The projection was done by the UMass Donahue Institute, which is sort of the official population projection body for the state of Massachusetts. You all probably know better than them how your population is going to change, but these are the best projections we have. Yeah, sure. So the chart shows you age groups. Down here at the bottom, we've got 0 to 4 years old. Then up next is 5 to 9, then 10 to 14. It goes up by 5 years with each bar till you get up to 85 plus at the top. So the length of the bar shows you what percentage of the population is within that age range. Okay? And the blue bars show you how it was in 2010. The bar with the black outline in the white center shows you how it's projected to be in 2030. Taking Upton, it's about 1%, is 1.5% is 85 and older. So the biggest bar there, 49 years old, that's somewhere between 10 and 12%. Okay? So what this is telling me is that there's a pretty healthy cohort of sort of middle-aged people in Upton. That's not true everywhere. 2010 of people. The school-age population is projected to shrink a little bit, as is the middle-aged population, and the older-age population is expected to grow. Part of it is just generational change. We've got the baby boomers aging to older age. But a part of it is also based on is from other places.
I understand your point about baby boomers aging in place, but have you taken into account the fact that we are planning now for about 550 55 plus senior housing to be added in Rockwood Meadows? We come from Upton Ridge and Government's Landing. That's going to distort the demographic a little bit. These 55 pluses are going to come from outside.
Right, so this is the kind of thing that we want to hear in the discussion groups later, and as the process continues. So like I said, these are projections from UMass. These are you all know your community better, so it's important that you work together to talk about and get information out about how you expect your population to change, who you expect to be here? And then think about, do you need more of a senior center facility? Do you need more housing for older people, which might be smaller units? Do you need more housing for family-aged or middle-aged people like myself who have children and need large units? How might this affect your schools moving forward if your school-age population shrinks? Might that affect your tax base moving forward? Your racial breakdown in Upton are predominantly white. There's about 0.6% African Americans, 5.6% Asians, 3% Native Hawaiians, and other Pacific Islanders. This is based on, again, census data. It's a sample. In a small town like Upton, that sample can be fairly inaccurate, which is why you might have 3% Native Hawaiians and other Pacific Islanders. So, in general, you have a higher percentage of white people than Worcester County or the state. Looking at your economy, your tax rate, it's about $17.31 per thousand. Puts you right about the 1/3 point in the state, 1/3 highest, right? You're not number one, you're not number 351, you're right around number 100. Your average travel time to work is pretty high. It's 35 minutes. It's increased 4 minutes since 2010. So it's increased almost 10% since 2010. This is coming from the census. So what happens is the census has a questionnaire. They ask people, how long does it take you to drive to work? These are the answers that people in Upton gave, extrapolated to the whole population.
It doesn't say where you work exactly.
Right. Yeah, so this was saying that if you work further away, if you work east of Natick, you're going to have a much longer travel time. Obviously, if you work right in Upton, you're going to have a much shorter travel time. So this is an average of the commutes in Upton. And the takeaways for me are relatively long commutes, and the commutes are getting longer relatively rapidly. Your household income is relatively high for the state. Your percentage of the population under poverty is relatively low. One thing that I flagged here just because it was interesting to me or was caught my eye was that according to the Census Bureau, your poverty for people over 65 is relatively high compared to the state and the county. Now that could be a sampling error because the margin of error is really high, but it's something to talk about as a community. Are you seeing that older people or data is wrong? In terms of employment, it's relatively similar to the state. Retain a pretty healthy employment in manufacturing. So you have a manufacturing history, and there's still a pretty good percentage of the people in Upton who are employed in manufacturing.
So some of the physical characteristics I talked earlier about traffic counts. This is a printout. You can actually go to the Massachusetts, have all the information about traffic. So that's Pratt's Pond. Here's the center. So about 9,500 trips per day as you enter or leave Upton Center on the east side. As you see in West Upton, you've got up to 12,500 trips per day because you're probably picking up more traffic from High Street, Hopkinton Road, coming in from that direction, which is not going to Upton Center. And then as you go further out, there's 10,500 trips per day as you go over toward Grafton. So this is, as you know, it's kind of a center of activity, not just east and west, but also going north and south. So one of the things we're going to be asking in a couple of minutes in the small groups is, what does this mean to Upton Center? What are the conflict points and the danger points and the places where you don't feel safe? Or conversely, if you're a business owner, where do you put a business to take advantage of that traffic? Does everybody have to be in West Upton, or is there more opportunity in Upton Center? Again, this is the sort of overall study area we'll be looking at. We'll also be focusing on the core area and thinking about the physical characteristics. And one of the key questions is just physically, what can you build in this place that has a pond at one end, a stream coming through the middle, and as you see here, floodplains along that pond and along that stream. I imagine a lot of you have stories of the various hurricanes and spring freshets that have come through and have seen the valley get flooded. So we want to hear about those and think about where's the places, where the safe, and how is that. So this is the map that we're going to start with in a few minutes. It also has the boundary of the general business district, which I'm interested in finding out how the boundary got drawn, because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense on its face. That was done quite a few years ago. Oh, there it is, a little bit closer. So we'll be thinking about how the physical characteristics of this place affect what can happen in the future. We'll also be thinking about how the regulatory affect what can happen in the future. Thinking about what can we change in terms of the physical structure of this place, what can we change in terms of the regulatory structure, and try to find the sweet spot. Don't want to get too much bogged down into the regulations, but just to show you that we are think about what the existing zoning is. Again, this is looking out further. Here's Upton Center. We've got residential districts surrounding it. You have the West Upton General Business District, and then you have a sort of a strip commercial district on the east side. I think we're going to wrap this up and not get into a whole lot of detail, but what we've discovered is that the uses basically separate business from residential quite a bit more than they probably need to. I think the trend now in most towns is to combine uses, try to encourage people to do mixed uses with apartments above the shops and so on. But right now, that's pretty difficult to do in Upton Center. Dimensional requirements, you can't see this, but basically you need a 15,000 square foot lot with 100 feet of frontage, and then you have to set your building back, 30 feet from the lot line? Which basically means probably that most of the stuff here in Upton Center you couldn't build the same way. And we want to talk about, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing, and what do we do about it? Parking, you talk about our experience in other towns. Every town is struggling with this issue, is how do we provide the parking we need without tearing down all our historic buildings to build parking lots, right? It's a universal issue of, the businesses want to be in places where there's plenty of free parking, but then they also want to be in a place where there's lots of people hanging out. And people don't like hanging out in parking lots. They want to hang out in a beautiful historic place and have a sandwich out at a sidewalk cafe and walk down to a park and meet their friends, etc. Those are the places we want to go. But all of us who go to those places, most of us take a car, right? So you need a place to store the car, and then you need to have a beautiful place to visit. And again, that's sort of a key question, especially here in the center where there's not a lot of room on the outskirts to build new parking lots because you've got a pond and people's houses and steep slopes sort of surrounding the whole center. So a very interesting issue. And then the floodplains which come through, of course, dictate a lot of what you can do. And then we also discovered that you've got your own wetlands regulations, which is not very common. A lot of towns just use the state regulations. You've got your own that are somewhat more restrictive than the state's. So this is us. We're in Florence, Massachusetts. I think our name is on the handout. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to send us an email or call, and we'll be glad to answer your questions to the best that we can. So that sort of concludes the introductory piece. Yes? As we've been developing this information, are we thinking about accessibility issues? Now, how do people with different disadvantages get to these places in the town center, and are we going to consider that? And all right, thank you. Any or yeah. Right. Well, that's I think it was the committee's presentation. What the answer is, I think that's on the table. Oh, you should come visit. Florence is one of the 3 village centers of Northampton. So Northampton was built along the Mill River, which flows from the Connecticut River up into the hills in the west. Downtown is the first mill village. Florence is the second. Leeds is the third. So I'm very familiar with mill villages. Yes, one. Right, so your question is, how do we make this happen once we come up with the vision? Right, it was pointed out that we don't own the land, so how can we possibly make this vision happen going forward? Well, you obviously don't, but you do control the regulations that affect development, and you also control the money that the town spends. So those are 2 ways that you can affect what happens here in the future. You can incentivize redevelopment by changing the zoning to allow the kind of development that developers want to build, whatever that is, and whatever you think fits. You can also invest, as you have been investing, in projects yourself. So the town could say, we should take the Catholic Church and redevelop it as a yoga center for senior citizens and spend $5 million doing that. You could do that. So that's what we want to do, as I said, our goal is for the May 2nd town meeting is have a clear idea of where we want to go, but not be coming to town meeting with a proposal for. We basically want to see, do people agree with this vision for the future of Upton Center? And do they want to keep talking about possibly changing the zoning or investing money or looking for state grants or whatever it might be? Yes.
Right, if I can help out, that one drawing you saw with 4 parcels of land, 2 being town-owned, 2 being privately owned. Those 2 private parcels, the owners are here tonight, and they are agreeable to working with our committee if we can make a plan that makes sense to everyone. So they're agreeable.
All right, I don't want to get too bogged down. If you have more questions, you can get to the small group. So this is going to be interesting because we have over 100 people, and we have 6 sets of maps and tables. 4 of those tables are up here, groups 1 through 4. 2 of those tables are downstairs in the conference rooms. Right.
Historic grist mill, the foundation of the historic grist mill around the and with all the historic things in this area, it would make sense to town. Imagine starting off in Heritage Park, walking down to 140, looking at this grist mill site, going into the center of town, walking all the way up Main Street. Dangerous to cross the street, lack of parking, and I think that's it for our group.
All right, thank you. Group 2. Want me to hold your mic? Sure. Here, you got this microphone.
Thank you. So when we started off on our first set of words, what describes downtown, we came up with a lot of the same words. Sad, cars go too fast, dangerous intersection, no theme to the downtown, undistinguished as a center of town. It looks as though we have not invested in it, and it's unwalkable. Okay, so that's our snapshot of what downtown looks like. So for town boundaries, I did on the other sheet, sorry. So somewhat similar to what you heard before, we went past the VFW over to where Elm Street is, somewhere past the soup. We talked a little bit about, well, of course, downtown town hall and things like that would be a part of it. We didn't really have an answer where we're going up into this neighborhood. So we kind of defined it from there to there with a possibility of going down to the Gasco. Okay. Things that we also talked about, the worst issue was parking downtown. I think you probably all experienced some of that tonight. We talked about, let me see. We talked about the library. Actually, there was some interest in the library, and on this one, we did a couple things. We crossed out some buildings.
Thank you.
There we go. So we crossed out some buildings. You can see some thought that some other building should be there. Maybe a library could be in that parking lot. Maybe a library could be there. maybe someday the VFW will work together and a library could be there. We don't know, but there seemed to be a lot of interest in trying to move from this building, okay? At the same time, we looked at this other 6 Main Street and thought perhaps that could go away and be repurposed for something. Perhaps this garage could go away and be repurposed for something. So there's a few areas like that that we just kind of put an X and said that doesn't seem to be important. Let me see, what else did we do? What else would we want down here? Things to bring people downtown, maybe a restaurant, maybe some boutique shops, maybe some theme. Are we an antique town? What are we? Yeah, so I think that pretty much states what we all went over in group 2.
Before I forget, all of you, you took notes of the group, in addition to the maps. We have a record tonight. So we are on group.
Group 3 did many, I think everyone here thinks the situation is ridiculous. I don't need to spend too much time on the situation. We talked a lot about the buildings and potential plans. We noticed we have wonderful parking here, but it's not actually connected to anything. We were talking potentially of raising the library and having it rebuilt. Doesn't necessarily have to be in the same site. If we went over here with mixed use across the street, you could have pedestrian bridges going over the stream. The stream is not in its original bed and could be moved back to where it originally was, further on the other side of the VFW. So it'd be kind of cool to have access to a lot of parking and then some pedestrian bridges coming over to this side of the water. Because there is some potential for flooding there, it'd be nice if you put the parking down on the bottom floor. That could flood. You don't really care about it, but make it almost look like your retail. It would really be one floor up, but the parking would be hidden underneath, and you can kind of do some interesting landscaping with that. There was some good discussion, really great discussion on the church. While people have some nostalgia for it, they really want to say, let's get an analysis on that. Does it cost too much money to redo it? People like the architecture, but there was a surprising willingness when we were led around the table to ask how many would take it down. We were surprised that a lot were more willing to take it down than I was thought. But we put that in as potentially real build, but let's get facts on it. Let's not base it just on emotion. And they're very strong about that. They're very willing to take down some of these old buildings that were in very dilapidated shape, including, might be surprising to the garage owner, but we included them also. There was also ideas about closing down this, was that not Warren Street? We got 6 roads coming in here, and I think pretty much it's too much. I know my wife goes all the way down, we live on High Street, she goes all the way down to the lights by Dunkin' Donuts to take that left there instead of coming down Church Street, because it's too dangerous down there. Very pleased to say that the group worked really well together and they had a lot of great ideas.
Brought my own map holder. I'm Dave Ross, one of the members of the EDC from Table 4. I think we heard a lot of the similar words: unappealing, missed opportunities, dangerous, inadequate. But we also had 3 references to the historical aspects to it, community, and opportunity. There was a lot of discussion in our group that why are we trying to do this as an economic center? This is our historic center, and if we need to do economic development, that should be somewhere else in town. Let's focus on making this a historic community-based center. We felt it would be good to try to find something to replace that old dump feel that you used to have. Well, I guess not as many people remember that. Going to the dump on Saturdays and being able to talk to everybody and doing that. Not dump your junk there. So some type of community gathering type space. The whole group felt putting the community center, the library, plus activity space for different age groups downtown would be good, especially including hard floor activity space for seniors. And then some of the things we all agreed the building behind the Racine building should come down, and we should change Grove Street to come out there onto Main Street. and then also close off Warren Street, and maybe there's the opportunity to acquire some land right behind the town hall for additional parking. But that would remove 2 of the roads that come right into downtown. So this is the Ristine building. Right behind it, there's an old house that's been vacant for about 20 years.
Is that on Grove Street?
It's on Main Street.
Oh, it's on Main Street. Oh, I
But change Grove Street to actually exit here instead of up here. And would that help alleviate some of the traffic? And then also closing Warren would potentially do that. And then one of the other things, too, we talked about is potential access up to Heritage Park and how we could do that to help make the space more walkable. And a lot of other really good discussions at Table 4. I think we needed another 2 hours.
Where are my notes?
Where's your map all at?
We didn't get a whole lot on the map. So Group 5, thank you very much. We had a very spirited discussion. But it was kind of philosophical in some ways. Some of the words describing the center: quaint, country, common, beautiful, Kelly Square, community, unfinished, missable, as in blink and you miss it, opportunity, lacking, mixed up, cluttered. I think talking about where the town center is, I think that's sort of an open question. It used to have more defined. Now it's sort of melded into the rest of the highway. It's almost one continuous thing from border to border. There's an interesting diversity within our group of younger residents, older residents, old-timers, newcomers, people who live in different parts of town. And I think what we heard is that for many people, this is really a bedroom community, both themselves and people they observed. And that's really a thing that we have to wrestle with as we think about the planning for the center, is if this is a bedroom community, which I guess means that you go outside town for work, most people, what's one business center in the town, and what would that be like? Or I think we had a lot of conversation, I won't go into the details, about different uses that could happen in the center, and a lot of people seem to realize that, it's support a whole lot of businesses. If it does, that has to evolve over time. But what it I think somebody pointed out that in the olden days, which like last year, there were, more groups would organize events on the town common and in the center, and those folks who used to organize those events are moving on, either willingly or unwillingly, and they're not here. They're not going to be here certainly in 20 years to volunteer all the time to organize Memorial Day parade or whatever it might be. So that kind of organization has to happen, and from my perspective, we can create a place where that stuff can naturally happen. If it's hard to hold an event in a place because of the traffic and there's simply not space or parking, no one is ever going to organize it. If you have a place that's flexible and can have lots of different events, people will find it easier to organize those events. So I think people have pointed out there used to be more shops, and even in recent years there have been shops that seem to come and go, and we need to figure out why that happens. So why are people, obviously people keep trying businesses. Hey, this is a beautiful quaint spot, there seems to be a lot of traffic, I'm going to open a business. But it doesn't seem to be making a go of it necessarily. Whereas you have other places, somebody mentioned the coffee shop in West Upton. What's the name of it? The Coffee Bean, which seems to be booming. So what is in that coffee that is attracting people? That's what we have to find out and put that in the coffee here. Right, it's the sleepy high school kids. So maybe that's our population. is sleepy high school kids or high school kids after school? You know, could we have a, you know, build on what happens at the VFW with the car show, bring in more regular farmers market, that kind of activity, flea markets, that kind of thing. And then a lot of interest in what happens with the library. Library, how can we make that accessible? How do we make it useful for all different kinds of populations? And that needs to be part of this, which it will. And I think that's about it. So now we're on to group number 6, the last but not least. Oh, that's you.
So group 6 was last. So obviously you guys have said everything already. It's upside down. We wrote from all sides of the table, right? All right. So words to describe it. You've hit on most of them. I'll pick just 2 from the list. One was untapped, and another one was meh. We had a lot of conversation. We had a conversation about where the town center, and although we define the boundaries similar to the rest of the groups, as sort of from the Country Super to Red Rose or Rose Pizza, whatever it's called, Rose Garden Restaurant and Pub. Do I sound like I'm local now? So, although we talked about the boundaries there was also a lot of discussion about whether this center is really a center or whether it's part of a longer center that stretches all the way to West Upton, whether those are one things, whether they're 2 things. And I think the conclusion of that conversation was that, like a group said earlier, that West Upton seems to be the place where you go to get stuff. It's more of a commercial center, and this is more of a civic center, so it's where the town buildings are. It's the historic center. In terms of opportunities and constraints, I'm happy to see there are 2 good things on the map here. So the playgrounds, and then VFW, the Rose Garden Restaurant and Pub, the Common. There's conversation about the traffic flow being a problem. In particular, it's difficult for people who want to walk around the center, and I think some people in the group felt like having a walkable center is really important, that it needs to be a walkable center. In terms of opportunities, there's a lot of yellow there, so there are a lot of opportunities for changes. Like another group, there's an idea of a walking path. Somebody called out that there's some flat ground there. You might be able to do something there. There's a big parking lot there that's great for turning around if you're coming from this side of town and want to go to this liquor store. One of the more substantive conversations that the group had was, there's limited space in this town center. What's the most important thing to put there? And so some people felt like it should be primarily about trying to generate tax base. And that means attracting businesses. That means especially attracting industry. And how do you do that into this place? People felt like, well, it's already kind of the civic center, so those are the functions that should be given priority. So things like the library, senior center, the other kinds of civic uses you want to have there, and also events, as was mentioned in a previous group. And then I think there was sort of a third set of opinions, which is, yes, we're a bedroom community, but that puts even more pressure on us and a need for things to do locally. Since our commutes are long, we don't want to drive somewhere else to go shopping. If there was a local market here for us to buy at, we would go there. We would patronize it like we patronize the Country Super. If there was a co-working space so that we could work at, we would go there because we telecommute 2 days a week in addition to our long commute. So I heard sort of 3 sets of needs for the town center, and a sense that the town center maybe can't accommodate all of them. So civic needs, tax base, and sort of things to draw you there and businesses to serve the residents of Upton. Okay, that's the end of our groups.
And that pretty much wraps up our agenda for tonight. I wanted to give a chance if anybody on the committee or town fathers, mothers, have anything you want to say?
You know, on behalf of the EDC, the Board of Selectmen, want to thank you all for coming tonight. When we started at Table 4 in our focus group, and it was like, what was your one word? And I used the word opportunity, and I think some people in my group was like, really? And afterwards, I was like, you guys get it? Like, I hope everybody here is a little more jazzed after today about what we can do here in downtown, right? There's a lot of energy in this room. We had almost 100 people or more here tonight, more than 100. I encourage you to volunteer for the working group and to come and be part of it. Donna is sitting back there at the table. If you hadn't had a chance to give her your information, she's already got a bunch, but you know, please sign up. Peter and Dylan have done this a lot, and they're going to help us get through it and have a really good plan. And just understand it's going to take years to put this plan in place, but we need to start somewhere. And this is the start with your input, you providing feedback. It's not 5 members of the EDC sitting in a room deciding this is what we should do. We want everybody in town to have a say and be part of that. And so coming out tonight is kind of the first step in that. And I encourage you to stay involved either by emailing the EDC, trying to find one of the members on Facebook, going to the working group meetings. We'll keep sending stuff out in the town crier and all of that type of stuff. But I don't want there to be any surprises, and we want to make sure you're heard. Yep.
Can we have one brief couple of sentences about, as you've been doing all this improvements together, what the economic aspects of it are? Like right now, the taxes we get from this geographic area, with this development plan that you mentioned to me, we expect that hopefully we might be able to, by contract, what?
Yeah, so the question was, this is an economic development meeting. What are the economics? We haven't looked at the whole town center because we're still trying to determine what that is. But the parcels that we started the whole conversation with, the church, the shops, the parking lot, and then there's a vacant lot behind it where a lot of trailers and stuff are stored. It's roughly $7,000 a year in taxes generated combined from those parcels. And I know a lot of people in this room have tax bills of that size or larger. And part of the reason this came up as economic development is that's a lot of prime real estate, and how could we potentially drive more value from that? Now, that's not to say we want to put Target in there, because that's not what's suited for downtown, and it's probably actually not the best driver of tax having it there. But well, it's tough to say because we don't know what the project is. But if we put in a 30,000 square foot mixed-use building, 3 stories, retail, with some housing in it, you're going to see that number go up tenfold, something like that, just in that one parcel. Yeah, it's hard to say exactly, but yeah, I think 70 is a conservative yes. But we also want to make sure that that's what everybody here wants. We don't want to just build that because it sounds like a good number, but we lose the character of what makes Upton Upton. So, and I think we heard a lot of that today, is that people said, this isn't necessarily a big economic area, but it's a nice historic area. So please continue to be involved, continue to be active. We want your feedback. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but we really do want your feedback. The slides are on the website. Our slide, so the slides Steve did are on the website. We'll get Peter and Dylan's slides up on the website in the next couple of days. All right, thank you.